Well, it was one of the most anticipated climate events in the last 20 years, El Nino. But what was supposed to bring a drenching to Southern California ended up being a dud. Meteorologist Anthony Yanez is here now to explain what happened.
Carolyn, the weather pattern pointed to a more than wet winter for us. We prepared for flooding, but in the end, all that rain moved north, bringing drought relief to a different part of the country. Here's what happened.
I'm in a place very few people have seen, the so-called center of the universe, mission control at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, where a team continuously monitors spacecraft and satellites like the Jason 2, the satellite that monitors the oceans.
The view from space is amazing, and we have a really great picture of El Nino building up, evolving, playing out, and now beginning to subside.
And this El Nino will go down in the record books as the first or second strongest El Nino since records have been kept. So what happened to Southern California's rain? Can we blame El Nino?
Were there storms? And the answer is yes. There was big storms, lots of them going across north of Hawaii, Central Pacific, but they all stayed north.
Here's why. In 1982-83 and 1997-98, the warmest water in the Pacific was close to South America. This year, it was much farther west. That changed the storm track and moved the storms north to the Pacific Northwest and Northern California, leaving Southern California dry and warm.
NASA climatologist Bill Patzert, who called this year's El Nino Godzilla, says most of the Earth felt El Nino's wrath, but the United States had mixed reviews. Those torrential rains in Houston last month were El Nino-fueled storms.
We would have to give it a Godzilla grade. But here in Southern California, it was a gecko.
As the El Nino signal fades, we're likely to get La Nina by the end of summer, and that usually means dry weather for Southern California.
Historically, for us in California, that could mean another year of difficult prediction and potentially another year of drought, which would make it 6 years in a row.
This drought is deep. It most certainly will continue for many, many years, all right? And so it's no time to cut back on our water conservation habits.
Well, Bill just said it. It's a bad idea to come back on our conservation habits, but that's an idea that's being tossed around up north right now. So,
and here's my thought on that. We live in a semi-arid environment no matter what, even without a drought. So it's not like we have this excess water in a regular year, but we're in the midst of this 5-year drought, and we're still in it. And so the thing is, yes, the reservoirs are between 80 and 90%. It all looks good, but the question is, are we living for the moment? Or are we living for what the potential future is, which could continue to be dry?
Right. We do need to look at the long term, it would seem. Now, you talked a little bit about La Nina and the expectation that it could be very dry here, but is that the case up north as well?
With La Nina, here's what you need to know. We have data going back to the early 50s, so it's not a long time to really look at this. But the correlations are usually it's dry here in Southern California, but it is another toss-up in Northern California. So it could be extremely dry next year. It could also be wet. We just don't know with the data that we have available. And of course, as we learned this year, anything can happen.
Right. Yeah.
Let me show you where we are currently, because we're actually still in an El Nino, but there's just not much of it left. We have a weak signal. It is just about to go away. And of course, the forecast for right now, typically when you have a very strong El Nino, what's next is that La Nina. The forecast, at least for right now, is a moderate strength La Nina. I have a feeling it's going to fall into the stronger category, but again, with the correlations, it's just, you don't really know what the impacts are. And so there's just a lot of question marks. But this is regardless of whether we're in an El Nino or a La Nina. I think this is kind of interesting. The consecutive seasons that we've been below average, the record is actually 7 in a row from 1944 to 1951. Right now, and I put a star here for with the 5, and that's because we're not through with the water year, but because we're in the dry season. Most likely, our drought here in Southern California is going to reach 5 years. Can it go 2 more? It's something to watch. And I just kind of threw this in there just so you kind of know. The consecutive seasons above average, where we actually get an above average rate in Southern California year upon year, that's actually 5. And if there's a takeaway from this graphic, We deal with a lot of extremes where we live in Southern California. It's not a one and done, two, it's 5, 6, and 7. So that's what we're watching. And I just wanted to point out that graphic that I was pointing to. We had started out the water gear with that drought in the Pacific Northwest starting this October 1st. Look at how those El Nino fuel storms really just got rid of that. There's still parts that are normally dry and moderately dry. And we're still in that drought here in Northern California, but we did see a tremendous amount of improvement. Not so in Southern California. You could see that dark, exceptional drought. This is a once every 50 to 75 year drought.